This new MacBook Pro is the best MacBook Pro that Apple has ever made, and it's not even close. I recently purchased an entry-level 16-inch, it's the laptop that's sitting right here, and it's actually one of the pre-builds that Apple has on its website. It's got the M1 Pro, 16 gigs of RAM, 1 terabyte SSD. Nothing too crazy. My reason for buying this was simply that I wanted a capable machine to edit the Silverado EV video on while I was in Detroit. Basically, could I make a video on this thing the same way I make videos on my main gear in the studio? I also wanted to see if these things are as legit as everyone is saying they are. Could this thing even handle 4K footage? Yes. This machine is an absolute beast. It is insane. This MacBook Pro delivers on everything a MacBook Pro should. Finally. From 2016 to late 2021, Apple made the infamous Touch Bar MacBook Pros that got rid of MagSafe and killed port variety. Those have USB-C ports and only USB-C ports. And they were riddled with overheating issues, and that keyboard was just awful for half a decade. The last MacBook that I purchased before this one was in 2017. I bought a refurbished 2015 model. I made a video about my decision. I needed a laptop with ports and MagSafe and no touch bar, real function keys, and a good keyboard. And guess what? It took Apple 5 years, but they actually made MacBooks truly pro again. As you probably already know, Apple totally backtracked and put the ports back in these MacBooks.
So I'm excited to share that we're adding ports to the new MacBook Pro.
It's got an SD card reader, it's got full-size HDMI, it's got 3 USB-C ports, and MagSafe is back. Thank goodness. The keyboard here has also been reworked. Apple's beloved scissor switches are back in these MacBook Pros. There's good tactile key travel. This keyboard is great. We don't need to go into detail on the butterfly mechanism that Apple was using on those Touch Bar MacBooks, but just know that those switches were so bad that Apple removed them from every MacBook after years of trying to make them work. I have to mention the full height function keys, which I believe is a first on any Apple notebook. The physical escape key is back, which is awesome, but you've got function keys, physical tactile function keys for things like changing the brightness, changing volume, playing and pausing songs. I use these function keys all the time. Basically, Apple has resurrected core elements of the MacBook Pro and then went ahead and supercharged this thing like I've never seen in an Apple laptop. First of all, the display is gorgeous. Mini LED, 3456 by 2234, 120 hertz. This thing is bright, it's sharp, and it's beautiful. Best screen ever in a MacBook, for sure. And yes, this thing is relatively thick and heavy for a MacBook, but the battery life and performance you get here is stellar. To give you an example, an hour of using Google Chrome, things like doing email, writing the script for this video, probably had like half a dozen tabs open. This thing didn't drain battery at all, as in it stayed at 100% for a full hour. That's cool and all, but the reason I bought this MacBook was not because of battery life. I needed a portable computer that could chop through 4K footage without stuttering. And this MacBook Pro does exactly that. I shoot my videos on a 1DX Mark III and a 1DX Mark II, and all of my 4K footage, whether it was scrubbing through the bin previews, scrubbing through the actual previews, or in the timeline itself, played back flawlessly in full resolution. This MacBook never choked, not even a hint of struggle. And the fans never once kicked in, not even while I was exporting. Just wow. Yes, I know I'm excited about something your PC and my PC could do for years, but this MacBook Pro is exactly what I need for my personal workflow, meaning SD card reader to import my audio, USB-C port to import the Mark III footage, USB-C port to import the Mark II footage. That leaves a USB-C port open, and I'm able to charge the computer because there's MagSafe. Wow. Being able to use Premiere with an H.264 timeline with no proxies and full resolution playback enabled on a baseline entry-level MacBook Pro is insane to me. As someone that makes content regularly, I am very impressed with this machine. I have to point out that no, this MacBook Pro doesn't export video faster than my main gear with a 2080 Ti does. I put them head to head, and my main gear exported the Silverado EV twice as fast. I did another export. This time the MacBook was plugged in, and it was maybe 5 to 10% faster, nothing crazy. Keep in mind though, this is the MacBook Pro with M1 Pro and only 16 gigs of RAM. I can only imagine what export times would be with an M1 Max and 64 gigs of RAM. The M1 Max has a 32-core GPU, and this thing has a 16-core GPU. But my point is, if you have a Touch Bar MacBook or something older and you've been waiting to upgrade, this is the computer to get. I can finally recommend buying a MacBook Pro again. Keep in mind, we will likely see some sort of refresh to these MacBooks this year, probably a spec bump, just keep that in mind. Maybe a 16-inch MacBook isn't for you. It's definitely worth considering the 14-inch option as well. When I asked on Twitter if any of you upgraded to one of these machines, close to 100 of you were as enthusiastic about these as I am, which was awesome to see. It's safe to say that Apple hit a home run with these new MacBook Pros. There are some other items worth calling out while I'm making a video about these machines. Some good and some bad. First, the good stuff. These speakers are insane. Easily the loudest laptop speakers I've ever heard. They're still laptop speakers, but man, do these things pack a surprising punch. Next, this MacBook wakes up instantly. It's been a while since I've used MacBooks full time, but the software, the hardware, whatever it is, you open the lid and you're instantly on the desktop. Granted, yes, I do have an Apple Watch on, so it unlocks instantly and it kind of renders Touch ID useless in that regard, but wow, it is just instant. Also, having Touch ID on a MacBook is great because Touch ID is great. I also like that the MacBook branding is etched into the bottom of this laptop. This thing is just next level clean in terms of design minimalism. If you couldn't already tell, I think this is a gorgeous laptop. Now, the bad, and I don't know that I'd necessarily use the word bad. Let's call them nitpicks. If this thing has a notch, why the frick doesn't it have Face ID? I don't care how thick that module is or how thin the display lid is. Apple has Face ID on the iPhones and Face ID in the iPad Pro. The iPad Air has Touch ID, but no Face ID. And these MacBooks have Touch ID, but no Face ID. Which Apple device will be the first to incorporate both? Because it's gotta happen eventually, right? Also, this would never happen, but it would be insanely cool if you could customize the I/O in these machines. Instead of HDMI, I want mini HDMI or a fourth USB-C port. That'll never happen, but it would be cool. Okay, no more rambling. I think I've made my points. I've only had this laptop for a week, but I promise you this thing is awesome. Expensive, but definitely awesome. I am so glad that Apple listened to customers and kind of went back to the drawing board. I'm honestly impressed with how much backtracking Apple did while simultaneously pushing the boundaries of the performance to power ratio they've extracted with these M1 chips. Definitely got the job done for me in Detroit, no question. Finally, a portable Mac product that can slice through 4K video and take on real professional tasks with MagSafe and this amazing display. And it doesn't sound like a jet engine while doing so. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a MacBook Pro. And yes, I totally edited the entire video on this machine. Thank you for sticking around to the end, and I'll see you again soon.